النصر المبين ونعيد الحق إن عبد رب العالمين.
Okay, so this will be the last segment of the discussion today, and we'll be looking at rational arguments that religious pluralists give. And it's not necessarily from religious pluralists who claim that they are Muslims, but rather these are rational arguments that you find commonly amongst all religious pluralists. First argument. It is arrogant to say that only your religion is correct, while others are wrong. And we all know that arrogance is a bad attribute to have. I like that laugh. Now, first of all, response. First of all, arrogance for the sake of argument doesn't make me wrong. Let's say any great basketball players here? No athletes? All right, great. So let's say brother, what's your name? Imad. Let's say brother Imad is an awesome basketball player and he has great basketball skills. And let's say he loves to show off his basketball skills and he likes to boast about how great of a basketball player he is. Now one might say that brother Imad, sorry to pick on you by the way, but one might say that brother Imad is showing off or that he's arrogant. You may say that, but does that change the fact that brother Imad, mashallah, is a great basketball player? No. So even if I am arrogant in saying that only Islam is the truth and everyone else is false, that does nothing to question the truth of Islam. It's only a criticism of the person himself. Secondly, we all know the difference between confidence and arrogance. So there's no need for me to clarify the difference. We all know what it is. Thirdly, humble believers do exist. There are a lot of people who are humble, who sincerely believe that their religion is the truth, and they're not arrogant. So how does this argument apply to them then? Fourthly, there's a double standard. And you're going to see a lot of double standards here. If it's arrogant to say that you're right and others are wrong, then the same thing applies to the religious pluralist. Because he's coming and saying exclusivists are wrong and pluralists are right. Well, then what's really changed? Argument number 2. We must reject medieval theology's insistence on adherence to truth as a condition of salvation in favor of a less demanding theology whose focus is moral virtue, that is, adherence to just norms, rather than theological virtue, that is, recognition of theological truth. What he's trying to say is, let's focus more on good deeds and undermine faith. First of all, moral virtue itself must be instituted by God. Morality could be one of the most subjective things. If it's not guided or it's not rooted in an objective standard that is God, and then you come to know what those moral values are epistemically by following that religion instituted by God, then moral virtue merely becomes an empty phrase. What is morality, objectively speaking, if it's not dictated objectively by God, who could only be the objective standard of morality? Secondly, this is just another way of them wanting you to undermine and downplay the rights of the Creator and uplift the rights of creation. They want you to ignore and abandon that which is greater for that which is less. Let me ask you a question. Let's say, for example, there's someone who's a great animals' rights advocate. He loves treating animals properly. He's always advocating animal rights. But then to his fellow man, he's rude, he's harsh, he's disrespectful. What would you think about such a person? You probably wouldn't think that highly of them. Because you'd be like, wait a minute, you're treating animals better than human beings? Well then, what do we say? Why should we think any more of a person who thinks less of God, who created creation, in favor of treating the creation better than the Creator. So we need to think about that. Argument number 3. The only reason why someone follows a religion is because he was born into certain circumstances. You would be a Hindu if you were born in India, and you would be a Muslim if you were born in Saudi Arabia, etc. First of all, this is a genetic fallacy in reasoning, meaning you can't criticize someone for believing in something just based on how he came to believe in it. So just because I'm a Muslim, because I was born into a Muslim family, that does nothing to undermine Islam itself. That is not an actual critique of Islam itself. For you to come and say, now you might come and say, you're not believing in Islam for the right reasons, but you can't come and say, oh, you only believe in Islam because it's false, because you were born into it, therefore Islam is false. There's no logical connection to that. Secondly, this ignores the reality of apostates and converts. There are people who were born into non-Muslim families whom Allah has blessed with guidance to Islam. And there are people who have been blessed with being born into Muslim families who have thrown that away and abandoned Islam. So this ignores the reality of this issue, because not everyone who's born into something remains in that thing. Thirdly, it belies how we truly think. What do I mean? For example, let's say I am against bullfighting. I'm against killing bulls for mere sport and entertainment. And I think that's immoral. Now imagine someone comes to me and says, well, Bassam, if you were born in Spain into a family that cherishes the tradition of bullfighting, you might have held a different opinion. Does that do anything to undermine the stance that I hold right now? Logically speaking, no. Just because I may have adopted a different opinion because I was born in different circumstances doesn't do anything to undermine the arguments that I have right now for being against bullfighting. Or let's give another example. We all know that what the Nazis did was horrific. I was actually in Germany a couple of months ago, and in Poland, I actually visited some of the Holocaust sites when I was there. And, when you actually visit the Holocaust sites themselves, it really has a tremendous impact on you. And I personally have, a big fervor for this subject myself. Now, let's say someone comes and tells you, well, fine, you say that the Nazis are bad people, but if you were born in Nazi Germany during that time, you would have most likely been a Nazi yourself. Is that a valid argument against a criticism of Nazis? Once again, no. Arguments stand independently of us. Truth is not dependent upon what I would have done in given circumstances. Would Bassam Zawadi have been a Nazi if he was born in Nazi Germany during the World War II? Maybe. But that does nothing to affect the arguments that Bassam Zawadi today, right now, could give in criticizing Nazis. So, none of us really think that way, because then we could keep playing this game of saying, well, you would have thought differently if you were born in this circumstance and that circumstance, but we don't do that. There seems to be a strict application of this faulty logic, specifically when it comes to religion. And I think that's a double standard. Fourthly, it's self-refuting. I could go up to the religious pluralist and say, well, if you were born 500 years ago in an Islamic caliphate, you probably wouldn't have been a religious pluralist. Because you were born in the postmodernist 20th century, that's why you were exposed to postmodernism, and that's why you are a religious pluralist. So does that mean religious pluralism is wrong as well? So it's self-refuting. Argument number 4. To say that only your religion is true is to show intolerance to other people's faiths. To say that only your religion is true is to be intolerant to people of other faiths. First of all, this contravenes the very idea, the very definition of intolerance, of tolerance. What does being tolerant mean? To be tolerant of something logically entails that you disagree with that thing. You don't tolerate something you believe is correct. You don't tolerate something you believe is right. You tolerate something that you disagree with. You don't tolerate things you agree with. You tolerate things that you disagree with. That's what tolerance means. So to say, I'm being intolerant because I believe other people are wrong when it comes to their religion makes no sense, in fact. Secondly, history belies this. Anyone who studies Islamic history could see how tolerant the Islamic states were and how the previous Islamic caliphates were in allowing people to freely exercise their religion. Thirdly, it's a double standard once again. If merely telling people that they're wrong is to be intolerant to them, then the religious pluralist is also intolerant to exclusivists. Argument number 5. It is offensive to say to people not following your faith that they are wrong. Mere disagreement of views does not necessitate offense. If it did, then that means we should never disagree with anyone about anything. And obviously, this is not rational. We disagree with many people over many different things, whether it be at work or at university or school or religion or political views or whatnot. Mere disagreement is not inherently offensive. What is offensive has to do with the style and demeanor of how you disagree. Now, the Quran commands us to preach our faith with wisdom and good conduct, and not to be harsh, not to be rude, to be polite and gentle. So being offensive has to do with how you disagree. It's not the mere disagreement itself. Once again, double standard. If merely telling people that they're wrong is being offensive, then the religious pluralist is also being offensive to us when he tells us that you exclusivists are closed-minded and arrogant, but us pluralists are right. Works both ways. Argument number 6. And this is an important one. Let's pay attention to this one. There are millions of people who weren't able to receive the message of or understand your faith. How can your God punish them for their ignorance? Now, if you remember in the first segment, we spoke about the definition of a kafir. And if you recall, I read out 8 Quranic passages which spoke about kuffar being condemned even though they didn't know that Islam is the truth. And now some people may ask, but how can Allah punish someone for being ignorant? So let's say someone did receive the true message of Islam in its true pristine form, and he still rejected it. He's still ignorant of its truth, even after getting the message. Is it fair that Allah would punish such a person? Well, here we need to differentiate between 2 different kinds of ignorance. There's justifiable ignorance, and there's unjustifiable ignorance. Justifiable ignorance could be like in the case of the Ahlul Fatra that we spoke about earlier. Unjustifiable ignorance could be that you could have cases of people who were ignorant of the truth of Islam, but they had no justification in being ignorant of the truth of Islam. I think Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah does a very good job highlighting this point. So it's a little lengthy, but I'm going to read it out because it's worth it. So Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, "A distinction is made between the one who imitated his forefathers even though he knows the truth, and the one who imitated his forefathers and had no way of knowing the truth. The two categories do exist. So the one who knew the truth and turned away from it is negligent and has no excuse before Allah. As for the ones who were unable to ask and learn and had no way of knowing the truth, they also fall into two categories. The first one, those who wanted guidance and sought it but were unable to find it." So people who are researching, they're researching religions, they're trying to find out the truth. What is the true religion out there? They're doing extensive research. They have a sincere love for knowing what the truth is, but they weren't able to attain that truth. Were unable to find it because there was no one to guide them. They come under the same ruling as those who lived in the intervals between prophets and those whom the call did not reach. So they have the same hukum as the people of Ahl al-Fatra. Secondly, you have those who did not care and did not seek the truth, and it never occurred to them to follow a way other than that which they were following. So you could have kuffar who rejected Islam, and they didn't even know that Islam was true, but they never even bothered to research or find out or ask any questions whatsoever to come to discover what the true religion of God is. This is why I was being very insistent in the beginning when I said it is absolutely incorrect to say that the kafir is only he who knows the truth and then rejects it. No, you have people who are ignorant of the truth of Islam and are still to be condemned because their ignorance of its truth was unjustified. And that's why when you look on the top over there, I mentioned some examples. Apatheism, in Arabic, kufr al-i'rad. Apatheism. An apatheist is someone who is indifferent and doesn't care about seeking God. He's completely indifferent. He's living his life, just eating, drinking, his career, dating, etc. That's all he cares. He has no care whatsoever for seeking the truth. And you have people who are doing taqleed, who are blindly following their parents. And they were able to go and do research, but they still didn't. Like, once again, it's ignorance, it's taqleed, which is ignorance, but at the same time it's unjustified. So the former, the one who has an excuse, says, "O Lord, if I knew a religion that is better than that which I am following, I would follow it and leave that which I am following." But the latter, who doesn't have an excuse, is content with that which he is following and would not prefer anything else or seek any other way. It makes no difference whether they were able to do that or not, as both of them are incapable. The former are like those who sought the true religion during the intervals between prophets but did not find it, so they turned away from it after exhaustive efforts to find out of inability and ignorance, whereas the latter, with no excuse, are like those who never sought it, rather they died in shirk. Argument number 7. We have a few more to go and we'll conclude. Islam advances with the times and adapts to changing circumstances. We can't remain straitjacketed into the 7th century. We must forego the understanding of the classical scholars who were influenced by their era and must evolve into more modern understandings of the Quranic passages and adopt a more religiously pluralistic understanding of salvation. Well, a distinction must be made between the constants and the variables of Islam. Now, here we're not talking about fiqh. We're talking about theological truths that are independent of any changes that are happening here on planet Earth. Doesn't matter if it's the 20th century or the 50th century. At the end of the day, the fact that Allah is one does not change. 2, it can work the other way. Does that mean that religious pluralism was false in the past? Now, are you saying that in modern times, we need to be more pluralist. So are you saying that in classical times, religious pluralism was false? What are you trying to say? So religious pluralism, is it objectively true or is it time-based true? If it's time-based true, then that means it could actually become false again in a few decades' time. What kind of path is that to follow? Argument number 8. There is no such thing as objective truth. All truth is subjective. In light of this, you cannot claim that your religion is objectively true, while everyone's is objectively false. Everyone's religion is subjectively true to its adherent. So there's no such thing as objective truth. Well, it's self-refuting. If there's no such thing as objective truth, then that means religious pluralism is not objectively true. And if religious pluralism is not objectively true, then that means I don't need to follow religious pluralism. So it's self-refuting. Argument number 9. Religious exclusivism, meaning that only your religion is true, encourages violence and maltreatment to people of other faiths. First of all, there's no clear correlation whatsoever between believing that your faith is the only true religion and other people's religions are false, and between violence. There are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of salvific exclusivist Muslims and Christians and people of other faiths in the world today, and they're not going around killing and harming other people. Secondly, on the contrary, if anything, salvific exclusivism serves as extra motivation for some Muslims and for some Christians to actually treat people of other faiths better, so that they could portray a better reputation for Islam. So I want to make a good impression of Islam to a non-believer. No, I want to treat him extra good, actually. So you might say, well, it's for selfish reasons or something like that, but that's not what we're talking about. Rather, we're talking about the correlation between this belief and actions. And on the contrary, salvific exclusivism could actually be a motivating factor for people to be extra good to people of other faiths in order to portray a positive image of their faith to them. Thirdly, it ignores intra-faith fighting and other factors responsible for violence. People who share the same faith, especially Muslims today, they're killing each other. It has nothing to do with just killing non-Muslims. One of the biggest threats today of ISIS, they are mainly killing Muslims. They're not killing non-Muslims. So to come and say, well, no, to believe in salvific exclusivism would entail that you're going to harm people of other faiths. Well, we're seeing people in sharing the same faith who are harming each other. So you're ignoring the other factors that are involved, whether they be political, national, tribal, etc. And even if religion could be used as a tool to encourage violence, that doesn't mean that you call for the dismantling of religious exclusivism. Similarly, just because tribalism could result in racism and violence, that doesn't mean that you call for the dismantling of tribes, but rather you call for moderation in terms of how tribes view each other. Last one. Argument number 10. In pre-modern times, discussions of religious difference like those that can be undertaken today were impossible. The great authorities of the past did not have what we now take for granted: access to peers in other religions and a wealth of books and information. Pre-modern scholars interpreted what little they knew about other religions in terms of the absolute truth of their own religious command. Practically, no one had the means or the interest to look at the actual teachings of other religions or to learn about them by talking with their qualified representatives. As a result, the ulama classified others under various categories established by the Quran and Hadith, and the Quran's negative statements about the others were taken as superseding any positive statements. Terms like Jews and Christians were understood as designations for misguided perspectives with no questions asked. So basically, what the argument is saying is people in the past, Muslims and Christians and Jews, they weren't having interfaith dialogues in the past like how we are today. Muslims and Christians and Jews in the past did not understand each other's religions as we understand them better, supposedly, today. And so it's for that reason that the classical scholars did not want to call for religious pluralism, because they had a limited understanding of Christianity and of other faiths, while today we have a better understanding and we should call for religious pluralism. First of all, many classical scholars from all theological persuasions were familiar with the religious views of others. When you go to the Mu'tazilites, you have Imam al-Jahiz and Qadi Abdul Jabbar. From the Ash'aris, you have Imam al-Ghazali. From the Zahiris, you have Ibn Hazm. From the Maturidis, you have al-Taftazani. To the Hanbalis, you have Ibn Taymiyyah. All of these scholars wrote refutations to Christians and Jews. And when you read their refutations, you see that they had a very good and accurate understanding of those whom they were refuting. So it's not true to say that our classical scholars had a limited understanding of the faiths of others. Yet, despite having a clear understanding of the faith of others, they never adopted religious pluralism. Secondly, Quranic passages are clear in its condemnation of other beliefs. This does nothing to change the fact that the verses that we read in the beginning of the discussion today are extremely clear in condemning the beliefs of others. Thirdly, a contemporary study would lead to the same conclusion. Fine. We're here in modern times, go and study the faith of the Christians, go and study the faith of the Buddhists, and go and study the faith of the Jews. You'll still see that they are contradicting what we believe in, and that they are still rejecting the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. So whether people studied their faith in classical times or today, the same conclusion will be reached. Just to conclude our discussion today, 1, it is perfectly rational and moral to believe that Islam is the only true path to Allah. 2, what is immoral, in fact, is to misinterpret Scripture for the sake of societal conformance. 3, it is not our business to speculate about the eternal fate of particular people when there is no revelation to that effect. Islamic scripture has clearly demonstrated that everyone will be judged fairly according to their mental capacity, knowledge, and circumstances. We should stop right there and let that fact suffice us. Lastly, we must say no to the modernist and liberal agenda to water down Islamic teachings for the sake of fitting in with Western postmodernist ideals. We must totally reject and resist this movement, which seeks to transform Islam to something the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions wouldn't have ever recognized if they were here today to see it. Barakallahu fikum for pulling through to the end with me, and I hope, inshallah, that all of you benefited greatly today. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.